We've stopped by the Molasses Flood here in Boston to find out a little bit more about a game that was kickstarted a while back, and it's a very sort of interesting take on the whole sort of roguelike genre. Can you first just give us a brief overview of what the game is?
Yeah, it's a game about survival fundamentally, and about a journey, and about traveling, in which you are a girl with her dog traveling by raft down a river that's procedurally generated and is kind of inspired by the American South. So it's very similar in some ways to a lot of games that you might be familiar with, but we tried to do a lot of different sort of twists on the idea of the roguelike and the survival game. But fundamentally, that's where its DNA lies.
I think the river is the, sort of the big star in this. This is something very very special and unique. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of how the idea came to be that you wanted to do to sort of center this game around a river?
Sure. So when we started out, we had some really loose ideas. Like I wanted to work on a survival game of some sort. Like I just wanted to try something. Like I'd always worked on shooters up until now, and I thought it'd be interesting to try something different. And when I was initially talking with Scott Sinclair, who's a art director, he wanted to work with the idea of like tiny worlds, like you're a very small character in this little world that you're exploring, and that was kind of the starting point from that. And as we started thinking about those things and how we combine them and how we do something sort of unique and different with them. One thing that I wanted to try is, rather than surviving by building a base, and setting up a farm and building a little house and so on and so forth, that you're sort of always moving. I thought that would be interesting, sort of, going way back to the Oregon Trail, a game in which you need to survive and you're fighting the elements, but you always need to keep pushing forward. And the river became a really natural sort of way to present that, because it's sort of this. There's a really classic kind of environmental narrative, of sort of going down the river. There's all sorts of stories that revolve around that, and we thought it was an interesting idea. And also, at the time, it didn't look like there was anything much else out there. Like, we were looking at other games with boats in it, and there was, like, Tubin, which, it's going a ways back. The Wind Waker, of course, and like Bloodwake, but that was about it. There really wasn't a lot. It seems like there's a lot now. There's starting to be like a lot of boat games. So who knows? Maybe there was something about the video game zeitgeist or something, where developers are like boats now for some reason. But yeah, that's kind of where it came from. And I think that the idea really initially appealed to everybody, because it's such a great, relatable type of thing, and it sort of tied into the survival themes really well. And then that led very quickly to kind of the American South as the setting. And I think those things they work really, really well together. And it ends up with what I hope is something that feels really different than anything that people have played before.
So how do you deal with narrative in a game like this? How do you sort of present a sort of a story for the player?
So there's a few different ways that we want to handle it. I mean, I think that the most important thing is that the core story is the player's story, and it's just the story of the survival arc. But then there is also, like, this is a world that has a history, and there are things that you can learn about it as you play. And it isn't just an endless game, it is something that you play to completion. So there's sort of that wrapper around it. And right now you just played it. You didn't really see much of that, which is fine and part of the plan. Like, we've been focused kind of on the core game for the time being. But it is important for us to establish a goal for the player right up front. There's like a reason that she's going down the river, and then we're going to tell that through to the end. But I think that's going to be like very quick little almost cutscenes or something, kind of like you saw at the beginning right now when the dog was dragging the bag. But really just we zip through that. And then the other part is the story that gets filled in the more times you play it, where there are various NPCs that you can encounter in the world, and you have little conversation trees with them, which we're treating kind of like, we're calling it almost like roguelike conversation, in that, they're a conversation tree that's very much like a JRPG or something like that, but you only ever have like one shot through it, so you can't like see somebody and then mine them for all their information. So one time you talk with them and you might find a little bit about the world or the history, a little bit of story, or you might find like just a straight up mechanical benefit, like they might let you warm up in their place for a little while, or give you some clean water, or give you some information about what lies down the river. So they may say like, oh, hey, I saw this supply at the church downriver, and then like, okay, well, the next church I see is probably going to have this supply in it. But that's how we want to tell the story. Is there's the simple one that is your goals, there's the bigger one that is the world, and that bigger one is slowly unraveled over many playthroughs as you encounter NPCs and they fill that in around you. And then there's the player story itself, which is always the most important. It's just the story of your own survival and your own arc, either to the end or how you tragically died succumbing to one thing or another as you traveled the river.
Um, if we touch a little bit more on the survival, what kind of challenges is she facing down the river here?
So the main challenge is we've decided to really build this based on real life sort of obstacles and challenges. So you're never fighting, zombies or anything like that. It's you face wolves, you face other wildlife that can hurt you. We don't have the full sort of suite figured out yet of everything that you're going to encounter, but we're looking at a lot of the natural sort of predators of the South and the encounters you can have down there. There's well, I don't want to start naming stuff because we haven't really committed to it yet. Like, we have the wolves in and working, but then there's also just the problems that you can get from surviving in the wild, like wetness. Wetness makes you hypothermic. Hypothermia kills you. So if you get caught in the rain or you crash your raft a lot, you're going to get pretty wet, and then you're going to get very cold, and that'll be the end of you. You also need to drink, but if you don't have a chance to get to fire to purify your water, you're drinking like kind of putrid water and bacteria, and that can make you sick. If a wolf attacks you, or you get burned, then you've got cuts or burns, and then those need to be treated, or they can become infected, and those infections will kill you. So we've sort of looked at all the different ways that the wilderness will kill you, and tried to come up with ways to present those in game. So there's a lot of different ways you can die. Basically, it's a harsh world. Survival is not an easy thing to do when you don't really have supplies and you're just kind of set loose in the wild.
And I guess that's also one of the great enjoyments of a game like this, is to sort of happen upon these different deaths and sort of find out what you need to avoid for your next playthrough.
Yeah, that's certainly the intent. I mean, ideally, I would like, and this is a huge design challenge, but I'd like for the player to learn something every time they play through. Like, every death should teach you something. Everyone should feel in hindsight like, oh, I could have avoided this if only I had done X, Y, or Z differently. And hopefully that's the process of, learning and whatnot. We're not there yet, but that's what we're working on. That I won't say it's easy. That's like one of the biggest design challenges, is sort of making a game that is challenging but teaches the player something every single time they play it.
I also assume that that's also a challenge when it comes to the procedural part, because you gotta sort of make sure that each playthrough allows for that learning experience, even though it's sort of random what kind of things you happen upon.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, one of the big challenges is if you go true random, in terms of what you throw onto the river, there's no telling. Like, you could just, it's like sort of the infinite monkeys on infinite typewriters thing. Like, somebody could have a playthrough that in which no food spawns ever, and it's unwinnable, and that's no fun. Like, it needs to be winnable just about every time, not always with the same level of difficulty. But yeah, that's certainly one of the reasons that we don't go true random. There's different ways we sort of get to put our thumb on the scale and make sure that a player will have what they need to survive if they make the right decisions about that which they encounter in the world.
So the river is very interesting, and I had some issues at first navigating the river, because I thought I could get off at any point, and that wasn't a good idea. But keeping the raft in a good condition and sort of navigating the currents and that stuff, will sort of the river grow more difficult as you progress through in the game?
Yeah, that's certainly the plan. I want to. So for the river, I think there are two high level goals, like emotionally, that we want to hit, or experientially, that are kind of the two ends of the spectrum. One is that sort of breakneck. You're going through the rapids, and it's almost like I'd almost equate it to like a Battletoads feel or something, where you're just like, oh man, you know, like you're sort of sweating on the controls, and you're making choices as quickly as you can, and just kind of try and stay alive through a really difficult set of rapids. And you know what you played, the rapids were about is like it's very much at the gentle and navigable end of the spectrum, and that'll ramp up over time. But you can upgrade your raft over time as well, or, so that you know maybe that becomes easier, like it can be more responsive, so as things get harder, you know, you get better tools to deal with it. So that's one end of the spectrum. And then the other end of the spectrum I want to try and capture is that sense of you know, when you're driving through the desert, you know, like you're in American Southwest or something like that, and you probably should have stopped at that last gas station, you know, and you're just kind of watching your gas gauge, and you're kind of watching the horizon, and you're hoping that, you know, you see a gas station on the horizon before your gas gauge goes to empty. So I kind of want to see if that's another goal at the other end of the spectrum, is like the points where the river gets slow, then it becomes a different sort of enemy, you know, like one of the ways I think about the design of the game is that time is a currency. You know, time is always chewing away at your energy and your thirst and your hunger, and then you need to feed those things to sort of keep them up. So, like, if you hit a long, slow part of the river where there's no resources, then suddenly, you know, the river is fighting you in a different way. So those are sort of the two end goals that I want to hit for that. And the way I want to do it is, as you move through the game, there are different sort of biomes or kind of chapters for the challenges that come along. Like maybe, you know, through the midpoint you're hitting a lot of rapids and it's really heavy water, and then maybe towards the tail end, you know, you hit the point where you better have saved up, you know, your supplies before you reach that point. You know, done stuff like if you catch a rabbit, you know, you can and you have salt, you can cure it and make jerky, and then that lasts forever. So you know, you better have done that with your supplies, otherwise you're getting awfully hungry and awfully thirsty along the way. So that's the plan as far as the river goes.
And that's also one of the interesting things, like you how you're treating the survivalist thing, because it's not really a tech tree in the game as far as I understand. Instead, you're sort of, this is someone who knows everything they need to know about sort of surviving.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the intent, is that she's experienced, and the decisions you're making are more about what you do with the things you find. And what we are looking to do is try and build up based on the things you actually find in the wilderness and things you can do with those things you find. But what I really want to lean heavily towards is things that have multiple uses, so that you have interesting choices to make there. So you saw in your playthrough, you got a couple cattails. Cattail, you can use the head of the cattail to fluff up and stuff your clothing with, and that'll help insulate it. You can also use it like a fire starter, like tinder. It's very flammable. You can use the stalk of a cattail. You can actually braid it into cord, which can be used for making things like snares. Or you can eat kind of the inside of the roots of it, which I actually need to do. I haven't done it. I haven't tried it myself. My understanding is it's not that good, but it's pretty nourishing. So if you get one cattail, you've got like four different directions you could go with it, you know. So if you eat it right away, it's not going to give you much nourishment, but if you're starving, like that'll help you that moment. But if you also have found some good sticks and then you make a cord from it, you can use that to catch a rabbit, and then that'll be far more nourishing for you. Plus it'll give you a pelt, which you can use to then make, you know, a pouch or warmer gloves or a hat or something like that. But you can only make those things if you find a few pelts. So, you know, all these things kind of add up into like the things you get down the line. It's not really a tech tree exactly, but you need to decide what you do with the things you find in a way that will allow you to have the things you need later on, even though it's not explicitly. It's more like you find supplies and components to build things, and then the more supplies and stuff you build, the more things you have that you can build down the line, if that makes sense.
Right, and it's the sort of the thing where if you're desperate, you can sort of get an immediate use, but perhaps that's not the optimal use of said resource.
Yeah, that's definitely the intent, for sure.
So another thing that I wondered a little bit about is the role of the dog, and I didn't really see a lot of sort of, uh, the dogs there. But what kind of role does it play in the game?
So currently, the dog Aesop is serving two roles. One, he points out supplies and resources in the environment in case you miss them, and two, he's additional storage. And he's kind of your magic storage in that when you die, anything he was carrying will be available the next time you play through. So it kind of softens the sting of permadeath in some ways. And optimally, if you realize you're at death's door, you should pop open that inventory screen and throw all your best stuff onto the dog so you can have it the next time around. We're still trying to figure out some other stuff we can do with him. There's a lot of possibilities. We're just looking at sort of what the best options are. But I think as we finalize that, then we'll talk about it more. But right now, there's just a lot of possibilities for where he can go and what he can do.
I suppose it could also be one of those things where you see some of the personality of Scout in her relationship with the dog, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we think that we're not doing a voice for Scout or anything like that, but we felt that a dog was a good companion, a good way to sort of express those moments between each other and say a little bit about both. Like I think you saw a couple of those, like when you're jumping on the raft, you can sort of see the affection between them and whatnot. And that's something we definitely want to continue to push on and, sort of have, as best we can, have Aesop externalize and express through, dog behavior. Like dogs are super expressive creatures, sort of some of the emotional state of what's going on.
So you've just been to GDC and PAX East and a lot of meetings, a lot of people playing the game. What kind of things have you sort of learned by sort of showing people the game over this week?
I learned that overall people seem to like it, which is great. Like you're really close when you're working on it. You're just kind of like, I hope it's really good, but I don't know. I can't tell because I've made it. So we've gotten a really positive response, which is great. We also have got I've got a ton of notes just about things that were not clear to people or that didn't work in an intuitive way. Like this is the sort of stuff that when I worked at big studios, we'd be able to, we would have external labs, get testers, and, you'd run 100 people through a thing, and then you get these detailed reports about, usability concerns or things like nobody could figure out how to do X, Y, or Z, or that this is what this meant, and that sort of thing. Like, we don't have that luxury. We have, some friends we can kind of rope into playing, but they're not trustworthy. They're our friends, they're going to be like, it's great. They're not going to want to hurt our feelings and whatnot. Whereas you go to the public, like, they don't care. People play. If something is stupid or they don't understand it, they'll let you know, and that's great because you need that stuff to make a game really good. So this is kind of scary in that it was our first time that the game was playable out in the public. But it was also like basically a huge like test bed for us where we got to sort of see where some of our ideas were working and some were not. My immediate list is I just have a ton of work to do with the UI, and like what buttons do what and that sort of thing. So yeah, those are the big ones. There's a lot of just straight up stuff that's not clear functionally that we need to get out of the way before people can even really truly get to like what the game is and how it works.
So what's the road ahead now, or the river ahead, if you will?
So we are continuing to work on the game. We're still figuring out exactly what our schedule is going to be for it, but we are bringing the game to PC, Mac, and Xbox One. And our Kickstarter backers are going to be playing it first in the form of the backer betas, so that's kind of our first priority, and we're shooting to get that into their hands over the summer, which has been our plan all along since the Kickstarter. But that's the main sort of plan immediately in front of us. But I need to figure it out. This is Monday after GDC and PAX, so I think I'm still kind of in a dazed state. And leading up to a big event like this, the thing you're focused laser-like on is the event itself. So now that it's over, I think my first steps are take a couple days and just collate all my notes and thoughts into something clear that we can then build into a plan for what we do for the next time we show it off and how we actually get it into people's hands.
Right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.